Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and Harmonious World is based on a Quincy Jones quote that goes something like, "Imagine what a harmonious world it would be if every one of us shared a little of what we're good at." What I do on Harmonious World is I chat with musicians, composers, conductors, venues, all sorts of people about what they're doing that makes the world a little more harmonious. And in fact, this episode is a particularly apposite one in that respect, because Apollo Chamber Players have a new album out called Ban Stories of Censorship. Came out at the end of August, and it features some incredible music, but also with a great concept behind it, talking about censorship from a modern perspective. So I'm about to chat with Matthew Detrick for the third time. I spoke to him in January 2023 and November 2021. I will put links to those episodes in the show notes. What you're listening to now is the album's title work, Ban, which includes a flute, a piccolo, a stomp box alongside the string quartet. There are some fantastic pieces on this album, and I'm really looking forward to chatting with Matthew about them. I hope you enjoy listening to our conversation. Good afternoon from here.
It's great to see you again. Yeah, how are things going?
Yeah, everything's really good, thank you. Very busy, and it's going really well.
I enjoy listening to your podcasts. You're doing a wonderful job. Is this no? Do you know what number this is for you?
It's
The
going to be,
300s, right?
yeah, we're getting close to 300 now.
Okay, awesome. Big
It's
celebration
amazing.
then, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining me for this episode. And obviously, this is our third chat, Matthew.
It is. Thank you for having me, Hillary. It's very much appreciated, and we love your work. So thank you.
Brilliant. Well, obviously, we spoke back in 2023 and 2021, and I'm assuming that this project must have been starting a couple of years ago, because it sounds like a huge endeavor.
Yeah, in a lot of ways it was, and I know we talked about our, I think it was our With Malice Toward None album with you, and our Trace of Time. I think it was Moonstrike. Um, I feel like this album may be our magnum opus in many ways, and I say that as graciously as I can and humbly as I can, and unfortunately as I can too. One of the commonalities I think with your work and your podcast, Harmonious World, we're all working for greater cultural harmony, right? Our Apollo's mission is to create cultural harmony through musical exploration, and this album we've been leaning even more on that idea of cultural harmony. How do we create cultural harmony? There's no way to attain cultural harmony without first pushing back against those forces of being the resistance against those that are promoting values that are antithetical to democracy, to decency, and to compassion and empathy and human rights. So this album centered around censorship and book banning and having George Takei. I mean, all of that is our response to, unfortunately, what's going on in the United States over the last year and plus, especially the last 7 months, 8 months.
Yes. And I think that there's so much going on in the world. When we spoke, we were sort of coming out of lockdown, and we believed everything that we were told, and now it's becoming clear, particularly in this country, that there was stuff going on that we didn't sign up for. And a lot of misuse of finances and misuse of power, and all of those things. And my sense is that this album, Ban Stories of Censorship, comes from a similar place to where we are, which is kind of feeling like we have to stand up and be counted about these things.
Right, and using arts and music as a form of resistance and activism. Again, I think that goes back to what we're all about with creating cultural harmony, connecting communities and cultures. So the last time, this project is particularly enmeshed in our programming work of the last 2 years plus. around censorship. Our Silence Voices season began with this project around banned books. In 2022, 23 was a time, especially in Texas, where there was a lot of book banning going on. And so I contacted Allison Loggins Hull, the composer of Ban, to kind of, that started our season. And then we ended our season, around the idea of being muted, and actually tying in mental health in that as a form of self-censorship. We also dovetailed with like revisionism as a form of censorship, especially with the Black community here in the United States. And that was really powerful too. And we'll probably ask about our, commission with George Takei and how that happened. And I'll save that for your question. But, a lot of the idea for releasing this album now, last year, we knew this album was coming out this year. And my hope was that, our election would go in a different direction. And even if it had, unfortunately, I think this album and what we're trying to say would still be very relevant. We'd still have these forces kind of pushing against decency and democracy. Unfortunately, it went the other way. And so the concert with George happened 1 month before the U.S. presidential election. And, in some small way, I was hoping maybe we could move the needle a little bit, or at least kind of create a little bit of resistance there and some conversation. And we did, but, I never expected that we'd be in the situation where we are now in 2020, 2025, particularly in terms of relating George's experience of, being interned, his family, soldiers coming up to his house and giving his family 5 minutes to gather their belongings, pointing bayonets at their heads and taking them to internment camps, and then having this Alligator Alley, whatever, in Florida, where, we have our administration is sending people unlawfully and sending them to Uganda or whatever. I mean, taking people off the street without any due process. I mean, that the parallels there are so frightening, and I never expected that this album would be this relevant in a way, unfortunately.
Yeah. So let's talk now about Marty Regan's The Book of Names. So before we start, I want to play George Takei's opening words.
After the bombing of Hiroshima and then Nagasaki in 1945, the war with Japan ended. America had won, and my family, among 125,181 persons of Japanese ancestry, had to face the challenge of trying to reconstruct our lives in an America still hostile to us. The government gave us each a one-way ticket to anywhere in the United States and $25 to rebuild our lives. We had to fend for ourselves, starting with nothing, and we were still seen by some Americans as the enemy.
That is a stunning piece of music in itself, written by Marty Regan. But the words of George Takei, tell me how that all came together.
This premiere happened kind of by accident in our revised concert, February 2024, here in Houston at the Holocaust Museum. We like performing at the Holocaust Museum here because I think it lends itself to more adventurous programming, challenging programming. And this was the main premiere on that concert was titled "Revised" by Deborah D. Mouton and Jasmine Barnes. And this was about how long is the main. It was for spoken word, string quartet, and then a chorus of 8 black singers. Very powerful instrumentation, unique instrumentation. But the theme around censorship and revisionism of Black history, has been going on for so long in the United States, particularly from some of the more conservative forces, and we wanted to kind of push back on that. So having that voice a part of that concert was very important. About a month before the concert, I was contacted by Marty Regan, who's a faculty composer at Texas A&M University. We've commissioned from him before, A Splash of Indigo. We played, it was our third commission out of now over 60, and we play that all the time, and we love it. So we have a great relationship. He said, hey, I have an idea. I love your censorship-inspired season, Silence Voices. I want to be a part of this, and what do you think about me writing a piece around the censorship of identity of Japanese Americans during World War II? Being a smaller ensemble, an orchestra wouldn't be able to kind of pivot to do something like this. But I said, hey, we have a month till the concert. Let's do it, Marty. I trust. I love your vision, and I know you'll come up with something great for this concert. So he created the Book of Names. This is in honor of the 125,181 Japanese Americans that were interned during World War II. It's a kind of 10-minute piece, very elegiac, very beautiful. As your listeners will hear, it stands alone as it is now, and there's this really wonderful part towards the end where there's a climax, and then each of the four string quartet musicians, we speak actual names of people that were interned, and it becomes cacophonous, and then it kind of dies away a little bit, and then kind of intersects with the music again, elides with the music. And it's very powerful. And in the initial premiere, we had a scrolling visual of names going behind us too, which I think was really amazing. So it was really interesting, that concert. After that concert, we had people in the audience that came up to us in tears and said, I recognized some people on that screen that I knew. And it was so powerful just to hear them talk about that, of people of every race at that concert. So it was about 3 or 4 days later, and I was biking here, at a park with my family. The Houston Bayous. This is kind of our river area, and nice. It's nice to get away and see nature. And it literally hit me like a lightning bolt or a phaser, in the parlance of a Star Trek term, that George Takei had to read his and his family's name in this performance, and somehow I had to make that happen. I've never kind of felt that kind of electricity in my body before, but I just knew that I had to make this happen. It would be even more powerful. So I contacted his management in New York City. I pitched in this idea. I never worked with somebody at that kind of level before, but so it was great for me to kind of stretch myself as, the leader of our organization too. It came back that George was very interested in being a part of this, and then we worked out all the details. The most difficult detail was getting them to agree to do a recording. A commercial recording, Hillary. But I knew, I went back and forth and I said, we need to have George's voice on we needed to record this for posterity, for the world. And eventually we did work out these details. So it was last October, like I mentioned, a month before the election, we had our Liberty concert and our We the People season with George there. We recorded the same day. We did a pre-concert talk with him, which was really wonderful. He told his story, told Star Trek stories. And of course, he told a story of being interned, and had the concert, and then we had a party, book signing afterwards, and he was the last person to leave the venue at 11:30 with me.
Wow!
He went way over his a contracted amount. So the humanity of George, the purposefulness of his life, comes through so amazingly and beautifully when he tells his story, and for us to be able to allow him to tell his story to our Houston audience, and now on the on our band Stories of Censorship album, it's one of the most fulfilling things that I've ever done in my life, and I think one of the most important things Apollo has done.
I agree, and I think the Japanese story of the Second World War is something we don't seem terribly comfortable with. And there are as in any war, there are things on each side that nobody wants to remember, but perhaps we do need to remember it. And I think particularly now, I think we need to be trying to bring people together, and I think it is a time for us to go, yes, we remember, Victory in Europe Day was a big deal. We need to remember Victory in Japan Day as well, not as victorious but as the end of that war as well.
We do, and as George says so eloquently, President Roosevelt succumbed to fear at the moment. And also, in a participatory democracy, we have to remember The advantage is it's of the people by the people, but that's also can be to the detriment too, because the people become fearful. So, and I think also kind of paralleling what George did in his life of activism after this, and after Star Trek, and between his movie roles and all that, is being in front of the congressional committee, which he talks about in the piece,
Yeah.
and advocating for reparations, which Ronald Reagan did and Congress did pass. And I think there's always a struggle here with our past with slavery, and amazingly, people still debate the what slavery was about and whether it was good for whom. I mean, it's the revisionism there and the Orwellianness of that is it's so disturbing. So we have to continually fight against that in my mind, and I hope that we can hopefully change some hearts and minds with this album.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that this album does really brilliantly is it allows America to look, to hold a magnifying glass up to itself. Because here in Britain, what we've done, it seems to me, over the last probably decade, last 10 years, is we've kind of gone so much of our structure, democracy, but also the buildings and all that was built on slavery. It was built either physically by slaves being brought over here or by the money that was earned by taking slaves, elsewhere.
Right.
And in here, we seem to have kind of gone, we have to apologize for that, but we can't tear down every statue. We can't tear down every building that was built on the back of slaves, because that would decimate, and we need to acknowledge that is the case. And it feels like this album allows America to do that. One of the things I particularly like is Mark Buller's Firewall, which has got references or is inspired by Catcher in the Rye, Slaughterhouse-Five, Huckleberry Finn, and The Great Gatsby. And that's a fantastic piece of music. How did that composition come about?
This is another case where relationships mean everything. And Mark is a composer living in Houston here. He's become a close friend of ours and a collaborator. We've commissioned a number of pieces with him over the years. He also saw what we were doing with our Silence Voices season around censorship. He contacted me, and through a couple of conversations, he literally emailed me back and said, "Hey, I have an idea for this commission, and it'll be around these five." He didn't have all of it fleshed out, but he knew, to take different banned books and kind of create a musical commentary around that. And the idea, the metaphor of a firewall, of being another brick in that firewall, is so powerful. And we'll get to the fog belt element of that too. But I think, using metaphors as, kind of launching off points for people to grab onto what we're trying to do. I think it's definitely, it adds to the power and the meaning of the music and the album. So I love what Mark did with these pieces. They're all, if you're playing some of them for your listeners, they're all fairly short and sweet. I think kind of the heart of the movements is the fourth movement, the Huck Finn movement, where he's on the raft on the river, and he has this moment of moral clarity where he says, I'm going to help Jim go to a free state, no matter what society tells me. And so doing the right thing when it's hard, that is what's most important, I think, that comes from that particular piece in that album. So I hope that comes through. It's fun music to play too. I mean, he really plays with the rags in the last movement too, and
yeah, and I think that fourth movement,
Night and Day on the River. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, as you say, I think this is what's interesting about this album. Although it's a concept and it's got a message, it's actually really great music as well. So
thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. And I think too, also you can get the best work from composers and artists when you give them a kernel of an idea, or you have some kind of larger theme to play with, and then let them have at it. I don't like to micromanage, what our composers are coming up with, but I think, doing something collaboratively, thematically has been really successful for us. And I think all of our, commissions and compositions reflect that.
Yeah. And in fact, I'm going to play the Huckleberry Finn at the end of the podcast. I've just finished reading Percival Everett's James, which is, it's sort of retelling Huckleberry Finn from Jim's perspective,
Interesting.
but
Okay.
calling him James. You really should read it. It's a
Yeah.
fantastic book and really easy to read, but that throws a different light on slavery because it's told from the perspective of, a black character who is nevertheless, he's very intelligent and he reads, and that's not perhaps sometimes how he comes across in Huckleberry Finn, but Huckleberry Finn is not a evocation of the benefits of slavery by any means. So
Right.
the final track, Fog Bell. So that's written by a Turkish-born composer, is that right?
Erbrook Arielmaz, yes.
And do they live in Houston?
So Erbrook won when we were just getting out of the gate, getting our name out there that we were commissioning new music into 2014. We had a commissioning call for scores contest. We had over 250 entries from 30 different states and countries around the world. Erbrook was the winning composer. He composes this really wonderful piece that listeners can look up wherever they stream their music. It's called Thracian Airs of Besame Sultan, inspired by different music from the Thracian region, Greek, Bulgarian, Turkish. It's just a wonderful piece, and it features this Roma clarinet player that went to the Juilliard School named Ismail Lumanovsky. Nobody can play like him. He's virtuosic and amazing. So since that time, that's on our Blurred Boundaries album. We've collaborated with Erbrook a number of times. A great result of that performance, he was able to come study at the Shepherd School of Music here in Houston and get his doctorate. He was here for about 4 or 5 years, got his feet wet in the scene here, and then he was offered a position to teach and start a music school in Ankara, Turkey, connecting Western music and Turkish folk music. So right up his alley. That's exactly what he does. So he left Houston like right in 2020. The pandemic was happening, and it was kind of sad to not be able to give him a proper goodbye. But we've stayed in touch, and I think this last December, this album was coming into focus, all the different pieces on it, and I just felt like we needed just something else to try to connect all of the different elements of this album, the censorship and the banning the books, and George's piece. And so I talked to Erbrook and I said, hey, could you write us about 5-6 minute piece about censorship? And he wrote back. I could feel the emotion in his email. He said, it's serendipitous that you contacted me right now because I was just censored by the Erdogan government. He was to have a performance in the presidential palace of some of his orchestral music with folk instruments. And long story short, I think that the Erdogan and his people there wanted to censor and change Erbrook's music. They didn't want the folk instruments. They wanted it less, like shorter, and to cut things up. So he said no, and he said, this is my vision, this is my music, I'm not going to change it. And so the concert was canceled. So he's obviously very much in tune with what's going on still here in the United States, very politically active in the best of ways. So he came up with this idea and the metaphor of a fog bell as artists cutting through the mist and showing the dangers that can lie ahead. So I think it's, again, a powerful metaphor, and it became, we had a local Houston artist render the fog bell image that's on the cover of our album. I think is very powerful too. There's a little bit of hope embedded in that, but again, I can sound the alarm against, these rising forces of autocracy here and across the world.
Yeah. And that as you say, that bell on the front cover of the album is stunning, and it's a reminder, isn't it, that for whom the bell tolls, it tolls.
That's right,
you.
and just that image, it's really powerful. I believe, and the music is, as a performer, one of the really gratifying things for me too is I get to lead my ensemble, but also perform in these pieces. And I remember we performed this, or we recorded it. Actually, we got the music 3 days before the premiere in January, and then we recorded it the next month. And, that was after the inauguration, and things were starting to look, downward spiral. And being able to kind of take out your emotions a little bit in the best of ways in the music and really lay into pieces. I mean, this piece really is an emotional force to play as well. We had this Chamber Music America conference in Houston in February, the first time they've ever moved the conference, and very gratefully we were named the Ensemble of the Year. It was a really great and wonderful recognition for our work, and we actually played Fog Bell during one of our main performances too, just to kind of call attention to that as well. So,
yeah, it really is a stunning album. Let's talk a little bit about the people on the album, because obviously there's the four of you.
Myself and my wife, my partner, Annabelle Ramirez, we trade first and second violin, do the best we can, and you know, and people wonder how we choose which pieces we're first or second on, and I say we flip a coin. That's not true, but we have certain things that kind of inspire us. So it all works out 99% of the time very cordially. And then we have Arya Charagosha on viola, and she's our new violist. Has a Persian ethnicity in her blood. Her father's from Iran. She grew up in the States, and her mother's American. And then Matthew Dudzik on cello. He's been with the ensemble almost since the beginning. And then Jesus Pacheco performs on Fog Bell. He's a Spanish American composer, lives here in Houston, and of course George Takei was a big part of this creation.
Yes.
So and then and we didn't talk about Armand, but I've got to mention, you know, we all know about Afghanistan and the history of hope, of despair and destruction in this country over the past many decades. So Humayun Saki is a world-renowned rhubarb performer. This is kind of like a dulcimer folk instrument, hundreds of years old, indigenous to Afghanistan and Persian music. And he lives now in the United States. He teaches in the Bay Area. He does a lot of performing, and worked with Kronos Quartet and a lot of other really wonderful ensembles. He wrote this piece for us that we premiered in our band music, actually in 2022 performance, and it's titled Hope. It's titled Arman, which is translated to hope in Farsi. And for somebody like Humayun to have grown up in Afghanistan with all of the death and destruction and censorship, to have written and created something so hopeful, it's very inspiring. And I think that again, the idea of hope hopefully comes out in this album as well. Humayun shared with me in February, when we did the recording, when he was a child. I mean, this still it shakes me, because to hear somebody talk about this when he was 10 years old, he witnessed his best friend murdered 10 feet away on the other side of the street near his home. And it's just hard to process that. And we have nothing to complain about. You know what I mean? We have everything at our fingertips. And we're, kind of throwing it away. At least we are over in the United States, in my view. So I guess looking at what he was able to create from that despair and still cling to hope, it's inspiring for me, and I hope it can be inspiring for others as well.
Absolutely. I mean, this whole album, it's not just a sort of complaint about censorship. There is a sense of hope. I think in all of the music, in all of the messages, there's this sense that we can't give up just because there are these injustices in the world. We can't give up.
I did a little bit of research. If you don't mind me getting historical, I looked up censorship in the UK, and apparently, I guess the Licensing Act of 1737 censored theater, and Lord Chamberlain was able to pick and choose the theater, the plays that were able to go into production. And okay, you can say, okay, that was way back in 1700s. That was a long time ago, but it wasn't rescinded until 1968. I mean, that's just mind-boggling to me too. So I think comparing the censorship in Western cultures, I mean, the United States and and the UK have had such a mostly positive relationship. But I think in any Western culture that values freedoms, and especially freedom of expression, it's really important not to take those values for granted.
Absolutely. And I think there's a lot of financial censorship where, stuff doesn't get made or it doesn't get shown because, or it doesn't get performed because somebody's got some kind of financial foot in the door of whatever it is. And I think that is something that we need to be aware of, that we can't sit back on in either the UK or in the US and just go, oh, we don't have any of this. We do. It's just in a different way.
And one other thought there is just the idea for artists here or in the UK or wherever to be thinking about, oh well, if I go this direction in my vision for this art form, whatever it's music or poetry or whatever, and it has this pushback. I mean, and then you decide not to do it. That's censorship already, right?
Yeah.
Like that. I mean, that's already the censorship of somebody's creative process, and that's totally insidious as well.
Yeah, and I think it's something that we need to think about because, as you say, in the scheme of things, we don't have a lot to complain about in our way of life for most of us, and we need to be standing up for the things that are right. And I think this album does that absolutely brilliantly and beautifully musically as well.
Well, thank you so much for saying that and helping get the word out there, giving us a platform. One of the things that's become even more important for what we do is cultivating the creativity in others. We're going to be celebrating our 20th anniversary as an ensemble and organization in just 2 years here. So, I think it's very rewarding to be able to put out something like this that makes a statement, but also does it in a way that uplifts many other lives and, the creative people in our world, because that's where the real hope is.
Definitely.
It's with our artists and with those kind of pushing the boundaries.
Yeah. And I'm really, really pleased that we were able to have this conversation. So thank you, Matthew.
Thank you so much, Hillary, and all the best to your listeners.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Harmonious World. Please do reach out. You can leave me a comment on YouTube or on my website, hillaryseabrook.co.uk, or follow me on social media on Instagram, Hillary S. Writer. Please let me know what you think of this episode and others that you've listened to. There are coming up for 300 episodes now, which is an incredible feat that I didn't think I'd reach. But thank you for joining me once more for Harmonious World. What you're listening to now is, as I discussed with Matthew Detrick, the Night and Day on the River, which is influenced by Huckleberry Finn. And I will put a link to James, the book by Percival Everett as well, into the show notes. Thank you for joining me once more for Harmonious World. Have a great week. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and it's a great delight to bring this series of discussions with musicians and composers and writers and all sorts of people to you. Obviously, there's no point in having a podcast if people aren't listening, and I'm very grateful to my listeners for doing so. Thanks also to Joe English for composing and performing this new theme tune. So wherever you get your podcast, you can leave a review. You can share this with your friends and family, either as a link or on social media and that sort of thing. I'd be really grateful for that. Don't forget that you can subscribe now. There's a link wherever you get your podcasts. So have a great week, and please remember why I started this, which is just to try and make the world a little more harmonious. Thanks for listening to Harmonious World.